Hello. It's 5:20, so I should begin now. So welcome to Powerful Applications with AngularJS. A bit about myself: I'm a developer, I'm a problem solver, a coach, and an advisor. Now, the objectives of this presentation is to show you how to create more advanced front ends for your applications. I want you to write maintainable code with fewer bugs. We'll also show an AngularJS site in 30 minutes, so I will build that very quickly. And I want to inspire you to build great apps because single-page applications are really awesome, and if you have a Cake API powering it on the backend, it's really cool. So if you're still using jQuery for front-end development, it's probably very hard. You either keep your front end simple because of the limitations, because you don't want to go into spaghetti, or you just go and do your architecture, and then in the end you'll probably end up with spaghetti because jQuery is not an MVC framework. So the problem with JavaScript generally is that you have messy content updates. So imagine you have a div, and then you're listening to some event, or you click on a button. Then you pull stuff with jQuery from, you do an AJAX request, and then you have to go and update that div inside your application. And you have all of those, and they may interfere, and then you might, you might get your JavaScript tangled with HTML because the JavaScript will have to put the variables inside and then send it to the div. It's also hard to keep everything in sync, so you can have, say, this updates to that block, you should also update another block based on that data, and so it gets all messed up. It's no longer in sync. Alright, so AngularJS allows you to automatically update your content based on the underlying data. The HTML is separate from the JavaScript logic, so you have the concept of views, which is a lot cleaner. And it keeps everything automatically in sync because you have this data binding. And I'll explain that in more detail. First, I'll show you a demo. It's not entirely responsive. If I can find my cursor at that distance. I cannot see my cursor. Okay, let me make it smaller. Okay, so this is a simple demo. This is a video store. So I sell games, theoretically. These are some of the games I like. I play Skyrim a lot. I spend a lot of hours on that. So notice how, if I just do this like that, here. When I click on one of those items, I get a preview on the side, which is very fast. Notice that this item is out of stock, and the quantity there is in red. I cannot see from here. So yeah, the quantity is in red, and all this data for this entire application comes from a single array. I'll show you what the code looks like. Get my cursor. Right. So before the code, just quickly, let's untangle things. You have a products array. This is how the data flows. You have a products array, and that goes into showing X products. So you get a count on that array. And then you use that also to the same array. For each item in the products array, you create this element with the image and the title and the price. And you just iterate on that and create as many elements as you need in your DOM. And then once you click on something, it sets a selected product. So it takes this item from the array and it puts it into selected product. And now this other segment is listening for that. And if the selected product is null, then it's not going to show anything. And if it does contain something, then it will display it and then extract some more data from it, like the stock and the short description, and then also act upon it. Yeah, so whenever the selected product is updated, so whenever I click on something, it will automatically refresh the content using the view I created. So here's what the HTML for it looks like. We start with basically HTML, and we give it the attribute ng-app. This is just to bootstrap the Angular application. In the head, we import two things: the Angular.js, the framework, and then the app.js is our application. We could just put all the script inside, like inline, but I put it in a separate file. In the body, you have the div, and it's an ng controller. So you see, the controller will control that div. It will not control anything outside of it. So it's a way to scope things. Now you import the framework, you import the application logic, and the products controller that I am referring to, which will be created in the app.js file, it will listen to any changes also to the DOM. So first it will start by creating the basics, the product layout. And then it will listen to events there. And if there's a click and things like that, whatever I listen to, it's going to intercept those events, process them in the controller, update any data, and your view will automatically reflect those changes. So inside that div, I created a single element with ng-repeat. ng-repeat is another Angular directive that tells it to basically repeat that container to which I applied it for all the products. So it's like a PHP loop, basically. And you get the item then inside this div, and you can use it to get the source for the image and the name. The reason I use ng source instead of basic source is because just the way browsers work, they will interpret the curly braces, and they will try to display it. So before the data is available, it will try to display it, and you'll get a broken image. So ng source prevents that by controlling at which point the actual source is being injected into that image. Yeah, and this is data binding. So those curly braces, they allow you to bind properties to different places. So you can either have actual string content, you can have arrays, you can put the image there in the ng source. You can also, besides just the properties, you can also get dot length in order to display the number of items. So the other div that I show you here is the one that's on the side. So when you click, if selected product, basically what it says, ng-show, is if the selected product is null, if it doesn't contain anything, then it will be hidden. And as soon as it contains something, then it will show, and then you will see in the H2 the name of the product. Hi. I feel stalked. No, just kidding. Now, the next thing is that in our products, I also add a link, an anchor. And instead of href, I give it ng-click. So as soon as someone clicks, I call the show details function. And that I will show you in a second in our controller. Basically, the entire div is wrapped in this controller, and so all the functions I'm calling refer to the functions in that controller that we define, and I pass it the item. So the show details is supposed to set the selected product. Now, the app.js is very straightforward. Our controller is just a function, and I pass to it the scope. Scope, as I said, is just, think of it as this place where I store my variables. It's the layer through which the controller communicates with the view. So everything you set on scope becomes available then to the view. So the products will have to be set on the scope, which is what I do in the first line. I give it an array. Here I show you just one item for simplicity. So I give it an ID, name, description, image, price, and whether I have anything in stock. And then the function that I called inside the link there is show details, and I also put that on the scope. So it has to be made available. It's like using this. Basically, it makes it available to the front end. And then I receive the item, and I just set the selected product. So if the selected product is not set, it defaults to null. So when the front end tries to check for ng hide to see if they should hide or show the div that contains the details on the side, it will just assume that if it's not set, then it's just null. So here's how just to repeat the sequence here, you set the products go into the ng repeat, loops as many times as needed, applies the link. Once you click the link, show details, it takes that item that we had from this iteration, and it passes it to show details. Show details then sets it on the scope once again into selected product, and that becomes available to our other element in the HTML. Some of other directives, so you saw a lot of ng dash something, so these are the Angular, so ng for Angular directives. Ng show for selected product makes the thing appear, and ng class is another one that you can use, which will set basically it's like a class attribute that is conditional to something. So if the selected product.stock is 0, then I will apply the noStock class, which then I define in CSS. So as my front end refreshes based on the array, based on the state of the items in the scope, it will automatically take it and refresh and inject any class that it needs to be injected. Let me show you another demo. Wait, I will find my cursor. Oh God. Yeah, thanks for pointing. You're like this call out on screen. Yeah, so here's another one. Oh God, okay, I'll try. Okay, so here is a search. So what I'll do here is I will search for, wait, I have something disappeared here, okay. Okay, so I will type S. Did I type S? Oh, okay, there it is. Sorry. Yeah, so here's S for Skyrim. So when I have S, that works. If I remove it, I put R, then I get two things that are highlighted, Skyrim and iRobot. Okay, so it filters, then it dims the other one. So you can assume that it applies a class in the background. Now, then there's the price. I can go up. And as I go up, some things will start to dim again because it no longer applies. There you go. All right. So in order to achieve that, what I did is, let's look at the price. What I have is a function that listens to different changes in the front end and just applies all the filters. I'll show you the function in a moment. So basically the minimum and maximum price is tied to the max price variable on the scope. And as I change it, I also push the results. So I do update results. And then based on those results, and actually the other field where I type the letters also pushes those results, and it causes the whole thing to recalculate based on those filters. So you can have like 100 filters if you want, based on whatever criteria, and then you apply them all, and whichever doesn't satisfy one of the criteria will be dimmed. So the way I achieve that in the HTML is, so here's my input, min price, update result. So as I change something inside that field, it automatically writes. So the scope is not just for reading, it's also for writing. So it's a bidirectional data binding. And as I modify something in the input, it automatically writes to the min price on the scope. But I update the results because I want to make sure that I recalculate, because I cannot listen to that change necessarily, so I just force it and say, well, this one is updating the results. I could, instead of doing it on the fly, I could have a button instead to say filter, and then put the update results there, which is why I designed it in such a way so that you have more control. And then in the ng repeat there, I added a conditional class, and I dim it when I set the item that hidden to true. So where do I set the item hidden? That I do in the controller. So as I listen to all those, so I have the query, minimum and maximum price, update results. So I hid some of the logic because otherwise the slide would be too long. So basically I just go through all the products, and then I go and refer to that query or minimum or maximum price to calculate whether I'm supposed to, does it match the query, does it match the price range? And if it does, then hidden is false. So at first I hide everything and then unhide whatever matches the criteria, or you can go the other way around. It's the same. But basically you set this additional property on the product, and that property is bound to the dim class. So as you change that, once you finished, some of your classes will just become dimmed automatically. So there you go, max price changes, updates to max price. It stops there, but then as I change, I also update the results, and then the update results is a function, and then it sets the item hidden, and then it goes back to the front end and applies the class if needed. Let me show you another example. There I am. No, I want to go back. There. Okay, so this is a rudimentary shopping cart, just to illustrate the example. So let's say I click on this item and I want to add it to my cart. As I add to my cart, see, it added it here at the top. And am I in the quantity field? Okay. And then I can start increasing that, and as I increase, you can see that, I cannot see, but you can. As I increase, you see the price changes there. And what's interesting is that, did I close it? I cannot see what I'm doing. Anyway, so this is the concept that I showed. Oh, that's because I reduced it to 0, I think that's why. Yeah, so I implemented so that once it drops back to 0, it disappears from the cart. And I can try and go up. I just want to see that. And you see, I cannot go above 10, because remember, the quantity in stock was 10, so I just implemented that in the cart so that you cannot go beyond what's in stock. All right. So it just reuses the same concept we learned, and that shopping cart is just I coded that in 30 lines of code, and that includes both the JavaScript and the HTML. So it's really simple. It's the same concept. You set the content of the cart on the scope, and it will just automatically refresh it. Oh yeah, I won't show the code for that example, but you can get it on GitHub and play with it and see how I did it. But before I move on to the next one, now I'll show you API integration, because it's so nice to have an array hard coded in your controller. It's not of much use. Oh, I don't have Wi-Fi, right? Okay, I'll show you the examples. Basically, this thing, it goes, makes an AJAX request to my server and pulls those products. I'll just show you the code to illustrate that. So yeah, what I did is that I added an additional JavaScript file for Angular, which is called Angular resource.js. So basically, you have the vanilla Angular, and then you can load additional modules, like for translations if you're writing a multilingual site, or Angular resource, or if you want to use cookies or something. So you pull that additional script, and we because we are now using external modules, we have to define those dependencies in our JavaScript. And that means that the initial approach with just creating a function for the controller doesn't hold anymore. We have to create an actual controller with the application. So we do var app equal angular.module. So we create a new module, which is called my app, which is what I showed you in the previous HTML. and then I inject any dependencies. So I can load as many files as I want on that page, but it will only take the ones that I add in the dependencies there. And then, so yeah, this application depends on that. I can have multiple modules on the same page. So now I have a controller, and it's called a products controller. So similar, just a different way of defining it. And then I inject the scope and the resource, so the two dependencies that I had, so I can access them. I mean, they're available, but I should also inject them inside each individual controller that needs them. And I specify a URL, and I use a resource with the URL, and then I go and get, with no parameters, I receive a response, and I set the products to the data. And I don't need to change anything else. The other function that I have for filtering, for the shopping cart, I can just reuse that. It doesn't matter because it's just an array. So I went to the API and I grabbed it, and in the end it was the exact same format that I had in the beginning. So yeah, we can do a post. We can add additional headers. So you can wrap those resources also to add additional headers for authentication, for example. So you can have like a header bear, you know, for a digest authentication. So yeah, I guess I went pretty quickly over this. Yeah, so some of the other development I do is you know, PHP, JavaScript. I fix problems and you know, with bugs, performance, security, whatever. I do workshops for Angular testing and Symfony, and I also advise on testing strategy architecture. Actually, before I go, let me show you a showcase of something that I did a long time ago. It wasn't written in Angular though, but I will show you how Angular is useful for those big applications. So 5 years ago, I wrote a software that was for a factory. It assisted the workers in the factory with all stages of the production. So, you know, you had welders, you had like those big presses that fold the metal sheets. So they work on a variety of projects, including parts of the new subway cars in Montreal. This is the design that was unveiled when I was still working there, and they will begin their deployment later this year. So I've worked on this project long ago, and I still haven't seen what it produced. So yeah, those big projects take a long time. So this application, you know, also was used to assemble TSA scanners, so I made your life a little bit more miserable, unfortunately. But you know, I also did some good things like ultrasound machines, so you can get a 3D picture of your baby before it's even born, which is really amazing. So the application was written with jQuery, and which is why I told you that it will eventually be spaghetti, because no matter how hard you try, it's hard to achieve clean code with jQuery when you do something that's so complex and has a lot of interactions. So this application is, you have those step-by-step instructions, and one of the screens here that you see is for creating the instructions. So you have multiple steps. So in the center, what you have is the current assembly step. Above you have you know, tools to add additional steps, and you can upload images. You can like press upload images, grab like 20 of them, select them all, and it will all go and add step for every image that you have. And then you go through them, and then using the tools that are on the side, on the left side, those tools allow you to create different annotations on top of those images. So you can say, look at this detail here, this is, first you have to screw this there, weld here. And it's also, it's actually in 3 languages, so that workers can be, say, you have workers in France, and they can use that, and they can read their instructions in French, you know. And people, they had a factory in Mexico, and they had the instructions in Spanish for them. So when we create that, we have on the side, you have annotations. You have different kind of annotations, like just simple text, like a part number. Other more descriptive text on the bottom, you see there, that's multilingual. And then, so when you double click, you can see the 3 different languages to translate. You also have little droplets, like a little 1 and 2 there. And on the side, you have the description that goes with that, because you couldn't put too much text on the image, it would be clutter. So to simplify, you would have that on the side, and as the person navigates through the stages, it will highlight things. So you see, it's very, very dynamic, a lot of interactions, very data driven. And we had to create, AngularJS wasn't a thing back then. I looked it up. It came out in 2009. We started the project in 2010, so maybe we just didn't know it existed. Maybe it was an alpha stage. So we went without it, and Angular would have been a tremendous help. So we had to build an equivalent from scratch. We built controllers, we built views. So basically, we were heading towards that in that direction. Because HTML5 was coming out soon, and it was still in draft stage at the time. So it was coming out. So we knew that HTML would be the thing. They asked me, would you pick Flash or HTML? And right away I said, let's go with HTML, and it was a good bet because Flash almost died after that. So there was a lot of interaction. We had to create those, pub sub for the data binding. So whenever you click somewhere, it will go through the listeners and update the necessary areas. But it was still a very manual process. We didn't actually build an entire framework. We had to ship the first version in about 3 months. So it was very quick. So yeah, just with Angular, what I would have done here today, I would have picked AngularJS in a heartbeat. The annotations would be just arrays, and what I show on the side would be just a subset. So I would go filter a bit like I did with the products. So if it's not a type droplet with the number, then I would not show it on the side for the author because it's irrelevant. So I would just filter things around and just move data. It would automatically update all the areas. I wouldn't, because here, see, if you double click on 2, then you have to fill in the text, and then it appears on the side. I have to manually go and put it there, which is a lot of work. Color changes. So as you select an element, the color of the element changes, and it's SVG behind it. So basically, it layers the different elements and draws them in SVG. It highlights things, and so yeah, the first version was written about 3 months. But I estimate that if I had Angular at the time, it would have taken about half of that time because I would have all the tools, and that would include the time to learn how to use Angular, because as I showed you, it's so simple to learn. You just follow a couple of tutorials online and you're set, and you can do these single app applications. Some people will use those for something that it's not really intended for, like an entire website. Say you have a forum, and some people would say, well, I want to use Angular because it can do the routing, and you can say, well, go to that URL, and it will actually still go back to Angular. So Angular can manage your URLs, but it's not very useful because you could just achieve it with plain HTML. There's no real advantage to it. The advantage is really when you have a lot of data that has to update many different areas and then communicate back. So you can edit the same thing here in this format and in this format here. So you can, for example, this annotation, you can grab it and you put it somewhere else on the screen. That means that the coordinates need to be updated and sent back to the database and versioned because you want to be able to undo what you just did with Control-Z. So yeah, this will have definitely benefited from the power of Angular. So know when to use it and learn when not to use it, because if it's just a plain site like a blog or a forum, then you probably don't need it. Right, well, that's it. Thanks. And we still have 10 minutes for questions. Yes?
What's your point of view on Angular 2 and the fact that you do migration paths?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I actually wrestled with whether I should do this talk for Angular 2, but when I started to rebuild the same examples, it felt completely different. It's like they're giving up on data binding, which I find really great. I personally don't like the direction in which they're going, so I might actually stick to using Angular 1 myself. The next version looks a lot more like React. They're saying it's not, but it looks a lot like React. So maybe you can try different frameworks like that and see which one fits best within what you're trying to do. They say it's performance issues, but once again, it depends on your application. There's not a lot of performance issues in this one because you don't have 1,000 listeners. It's just like maybe 3-4 arrays. One array for the steps, one array for the current step, maybe the annotations, maybe some alerts on the step. That's it. So it's very straightforward. Yeah, I personally don't like the direction where it's going. Yeah.
something like this to work with Cake, is it pretty much you're just talking back and forth with Cake using JSONs? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So I have an API. So the question was, am I using Cake back and forth? Actually, I'm personally I use different frameworks, so but it's all the same. You. All right. So the idea conceptually is that you create this request, as I showed you. You do a GET request, and then on the other side you would have a controller for, are you asking for products or something else, and then you would process this request, maybe some filters because you're looking for products in a certain category. So you just use the ORM, you fetch what you need, just do a JSON encode and throw it back. Does that answer the question, or you had something more in mind? Okay. And if you have something else, you can come to me afterwards. I can give some ideas. I've worked with someone. I taught Angular to someone who was using Cake, and he built the API in Cake.
Do you have any suggested resources for learning Angular? I know there are documentation upgrades in the world.
Yeah, so suggestions for learning Angular. There's plenty of tutorials online. I would suggest that for learning anything seriously, you can subscribe to one of those e-learning sites. Like there's Pluralsight, there's O'Reilly, there's others. So they have high quality tutorials there, and they what's good about those libraries is, well, once you subscribe to a single library, they don't have content overlap usually, so you can just watch anything and not worry about having like half of the content same as the other presentation, which is what happens when you watch tutorials just on YouTube randomly. Yeah.
A suggested resource, if you go on to AngularJS.org, there's a thing at the top in the header where it says learn, and there's a free course that somebody put out that's very, very good, and it follows a lot of the newer conventions. So, like one of the later versions of JS put in controller as syntax, which allows you to have really tightly scoped things so that if you inject everything in scope, you could accidentally use a variable from something out of scope. And so that tutorial, though, follows all the recommended conventions. It's very easy to follow. They have videos. They have code examples. They have a code actually IDE built specifically for the tutorial that they walk you through and give you immediate feedback on what you're doing. It's a very, very good resource for learning JS, AngularJS.
Yeah, so the question, the answer was rather when you go to the AngularJS website, you have a link at the top for the tutorial, and it shows best practices as well. Anything else?
What made you choose Angular versus some of the other frameworks out there?
Okay, so what made me choose Angular? It was just the first thing I found. It's that simple. And I learned it, and it suited my needs, and I didn't look elsewhere. I mean, I started to look elsewhere afterwards when I heard about Angular 2 and React and all these things. So I started looking around, but I still like the approach of Angular 1. Yeah. All right, great. Well, thanks.